Hello, my name is Melissa Moore, and I'm the steward of Karuna Training. And Karuna Training is a comprehensive training that results in a certificate in contemplative psychology. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about contemplative psychology, which is really a practice of non-dual, compassionate exchange, or really how to offer ourselves to the world with compassion. The work draws on Tibetan Buddhism, and it originated at Naropa University in the early 70s. And the founder of Naropa University was Chogyam Trungpa, a Tibetan Rinpoche who escaped the Chinese invasion in 1959 and ended up in Oxford, England first, and eventually in Boulder, Colorado, in the height of the 60s and early 70s. So I was very fortunate to meet him when I was 24. And I've been working with these teachings and his unconventional wisdom for the last 40 years. So in Karuna Training, we integrate Buddhist teachings and Western psychological processes. It's an experiential training that works in a cohort model. And what's important to know is one doesn't need to be a Buddhist or even a therapist for these teachings to be relevant, because we all have relationships. And this is about our relational health. In Karuna, we work with the same people for a year and a half. We call that a cohort journey. And we learn from our relationships in the cohort. We discover how much our mind is already conditioned and how that conditioning affects our relationships constantly. So often on the first night of the training, we sit in a circle, we do a ritual, and at the beginning of that, I always tell people to look around the room, that every relationship that they've ever had in their life that's important is in the room because they're in the room. And that they've already made up their mind who they like and who they don't like in the circle. And that's not based on reality, it's based on their mental formations that they carry into every single relationship that they have. So Karuna is about discovering and disarming these mental formations and learning to experience the world more unconditionally. So today I'm going to point out 3 distinguishing characteristics of contemplative psychology, what makes us unique. This is a humanistic approach in that we understand everyone, no matter what stage of life or what's happening in the present moment, that everyone possesses intrinsic health, or sometimes we say basic sanity. Intrinsic health is really unconditioned health, meaning nothing can destroy it or undercut it. It is a resource within us. It's the resource from which we can arise and be resilient when we go through difficult times. So it doesn't depend on how much money we have in the bank. It doesn't depend on whether we're in or out of relationship or what the state of our relationship. It doesn't even depend if we have a diagnosis or if we're dying. We still possess this intrinsic health. And much of Karuna training is about learning to trust that and turn our allegiance to it. Where I first learned about intrinsic health was in the 80s, working during the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco. And I volunteered cooking at a hospice. And I had already learned about intrinsic health. I thought I understood what it was. But it wasn't until that experience where I visited the hospice every day, and I noticed that there was almost like a right or a left turn at the moment of death or at the time when people were dying. And one option was that people would be, of course, understandably depressed and angry and disappointed and blaming of the world for their circumstance, and really very negative at the moment. These were very young men, for the most part, that were dying. But the other option was someone who just lived their life fully in their heart until the end of their life, even at the moment of death. And I was so struck by that. And I realized, oh, we all possess intrinsic health, but we don't all know that we have it. So Karuna is very much one of the first characteristics that makes us unique, is that we turn our allegiance to this intrinsic sanity. That is very much a path and practice in Karuna training. So the second distinguishing aspect of contemplative psychology is how we work with a process called exchange. Exchange is the nonverbal aspect of communication that's always happening, and it always comes to us through feelings, usually unspoken and often unconscious. So exchange is this subliminal space between us that's always communicating. When people say, oh, I'm fine, and you know that they're not, you're getting an exchange through space. So we can read that. We learn to read that energy. We bring that unspoken, invisible energy conscious. So for example, when we live with someone or when we work with someone that we know, and we come in first thing in the morning and we feel that they're in a bad mood. They don't even have to say anything, but we can feel it from a distance. And what do we do in our minds is we say, oh, they're mad at me. Oh, there they go again. I did something wrong, because we feel things and then we make things up. When we make things up, that's called projection. And we're living often out of our projections in our relationships with people for years. So in Karuna, we bring awareness to this unconscious information that is always passing between us and the world, not just with other sentient beings, but also the trees and the greenery and the sky and the earth and all the animals. We have this unspoken out relationship with the world that's very full and qualitative. We could call it vibes if you want. And we learn to not make things up about that, but to experience that energy directly and completely, and begin to trust that we can stay present without taking refuge in our mental conditioning. So there's a very significant path of learning to work with exchange and emotional energies and expand our capacity to feel our experience directly as it's happening in the present moment. And finally, the most intriguing aspect of contemplative psychology is what I think is the medicine for the changing times that we find ourselves living through. And this is the understanding that confusion and wisdom operate on a continuum and are inseparable and connected. So such confused emotions like aggression or jealousy or pride or unbridled passion or ignorance, for that matter, are energies that we all have a pretty entrenched relationship with pretty much after the age of 8, according to the Buddhist understanding of how mind develops. So for example, let's take anger, which many folks fear expressing, and they also fear having it aimed at them. So anger is always happening in the head. It's the energy of anger is fueled by justification. It's always about being right. So when we get angry and we know what we know and we're not convinced otherwise, it's because we're running an argument through our head over and over again, which fuels the anger. And but the seed of anger, the very first thought of anger, is often clear seeing. We see something extremely clearly but our attachment to being right makes us angry. So suppose we allow that justification and need to be right to dissolve. What we discover is the mind can see clearly and learn to reflect clearly what's happening in the world, which can be very pacifying to aggressive energies in ourselves and in others. It's like a good lawyer who keeps their cool and is able to just present the facts. So this clear seeing is a very beneficial skill, and it's only one aspect of wisdom that's part of an entire ancient wisdom mandala in Tibetan Buddhism called the 5 Buddha family mandala, which takes the 5 poisons of passion, aggression, ignorance, pride, and jealousy, and understands that there's a continuum and wisdom aspect to those energies. And so we work a lot with this 5 Buddha family mandala to start to discover where and which energies we trust and which energies we don't, and which ones we're highly conditioned. And we learn that there's a whole breadth of energy and feeling that we can explore. So this understanding of the inseparability of wisdom and confusion becomes a path of transmutation, a path of transmuting our confusion into wisdom. And it's a wonderful practice. It takes a lot of stability of mind, which is where meditation comes in. And if you're interested in learning more about meditation and how we turn our allegiance to intrinsic health, please watch the next course. Thank you.